We're recording. Okay. What is your name and how do I know you?
My name is Susie Newcomb, and I'm Miles Carbot's grandmother.
When were you born? When and where were you born?
I was born in Chicago, Illinois in April of 1942.
Do you remember anything about the Cold War as a child?
I remember about the Cold War as a child because we lived in Idaho, and but I think at that time that all over the United States there was a lot of talk about building bomb shelters. In fact, not just in the United States, but in other countries as well, England and so on. Also, there was a lot of talk about spies, Russian spies, and the kinds of ways that they were spying on us. And so I was aware, actually, also at the time of the Cold War, my mother used to send care packages. Well, this is probably right after the World War II, but she would send care packages to German families with Hershey's chocolate and cocoa powder and peanut butter, because there was this whole feeling of giving back to the people who suffered in Germany. And I would help her package those things up to send over there. So I remember the Cold War that came on after that time, and the whole idea that we might be bombed, and so we should have a bomb shelter. But because we lived in Idaho, I don't think we. That's why I know my dad didn't build one.
Okay. Was there anything that hinted that the Cold War was real?
Yes, because we had threats from Russia, and just actually, you're seeing what it was like a little bit now. We're in a Cold War now, because we have Korea in the same situation with us. It's very scary, really.
How did your family possibly prepare for an attack during the Cold War?
Because we lived in Idaho, I think that's why I was still pretty young, but I don't think that there was talk about the bomb shelters. But as I say, we didn't build one.
What was your clearest memory of like the Cold War during like the space race, or like something during the Berlin Wall or the Cuban Missile Crisis?
Well, there are a lot of things jumbled together there, because I would, first of all, after what I remember about the space race beginning was when Yuri Gagarin and the Russians sent first a dog and then a human being up into space in a space capsule. And when President Kennedy was in office, that gave him a lot of concern that they're going faster than we are and we're going to be in trouble. So he got us into our own space race program. And the Cuban Missile Crisis also happened shortly after he took office. And that was very scary, because the Russians sent missiles over to have perhaps a missile base in Cuba. And Cuba is very, very close to the United States, and it could have been terribly dangerous. And there were threats too that the missiles were going to be, in fact, used against us. And so again, this is the feeling that we have now.
Did your experience affect any relationships or your experience with other people in other countries, and in particular Russia?
I will say this, that my goal as a child growing up was to get to know people in Europe and other countries, and because I thought the best way for us to avoid a nuclear war or any kind of war was to reach out to other countries and be friends with other countries and understand other countries. So I went to school in Switzerland for 2 years. I learned French. I ultimately learned to speak Russian because I married a physicist from here, and he was invited to go to Russia under Brezhnev. And so I was excited to learn about it and to try to make an impression of friendship. And we actually didn't end up going for various reasons, but I did learn to speak and write in Russian, and I just think that's so important to understand countries.
Did you truly believe that the nuclear weapons were going to be used?
I felt that it was certainly possible. In fact, I think it's more possible now. I think it's because we had people, ambassadors to the SALT talks in Switzerland, and it was very close to my school, and I knew that there was a lot of work going on to make sure that we had an international agreement not to use our nuclear weapons, and to the ones that we did have would be kept to a minimum. And unfortunately, under this presidency, this is changing very dramatically, and so I think we all have to pay attention.
Okay. Do you know anything about the McCarthy era?
I didn't myself experience it, but I did know about it, and I do know about it in that that's when people were easily ostracized and because they were considered to be communist. And that was all a part of that Cold War thing too, where I was really too young to know too much more than what I've said, but they were very quick to say that somebody in the film industry or in government or whatever was a communist. However, there were a lot of people that did belong, like Charlie Chaplin did belong to the Communist Party, because it was a more acceptable thing at that time. So there were many people involved in that, and it almost reminded me now, what I've heard about it, basically as what's going through with the immigration policy today, where it's too easy to pick up and say that somebody is an immigrant that should be thrown out, without careful consideration, or to even decide to do that at all. So I feel that's people that experienced or knew about the MacArthur era can see how dangerous it can be to just make quick decisions about a person.
What was your experience during the Vietnam War?
The Vietnam War, I was a junior and a senior mostly a senior at UC Berkeley, and was very involved in helping to stop the the war. We felt it was very senseless and wrong. And so I was a part of the student movement that wanted to stop the war in Vietnam. And by the time I started a family, the war was still going on, and it was just terribly sad.
Well, thank you.
Okay.
That's
And I hope it helps people learn that we have to pay attention to past experiences.
Yeah.
And thank you for asking me.
You're welcome.
All right.
That's the end.
Did you like